Welcome to the First Customers Podcast. Today we have Billy Samoa Saleebey, who is a former Tesla executive, and now he's the co-founder and CEO of Podify, a service that produces podcasts. Podcasts like Language of Love with Dr. Laura Berman from Oprah's TV network. Billy, honored to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. Welcome to First Customers.
Oh, Paris, it's an absolute delight. We got a chance to meet last week, and I'm super excited to have our conversation today.
So you've got an awesome resume, obviously, big name like Tesla on there. You've worked with some big podcasts. So you could start wherever you feel like, but how'd you get your first customers?
Yeah, well, I love the premise of this show because it allows me to reflect and think back to the beginning of forming my company. And I'll start with that because
Okay.
I, I left Tesla and I thought, I could do whatever I wanted to do at that point. I could get another job in corporate. I could work for a big company, a small company, a startup. There's so many different things that I could do. But ultimately, I felt a magnetic pull to podcasting. And I just had to start with my own show. And so I started my own show in 2019. And based on my experience very early on in starting my own show, I realized quickly that it takes a lot of work. And so I decided I needed people to help with my show. So I made the priority finding great people to help me produce my podcast. And basically, what I realized is because of the volume of work, I needed people to help me with my show. I knew other people needed help with the show. And so I started my own company, Podify, to do just that. And so when I think back to my early customers, I thought, go to my own warm market, go to the people that I know, because ultimately those are going to be the people that have the instant trust. They know me, they like me, they trust me. And even if they themselves don't have a podcast, they may have somebody in their orbit that has a podcast. So one of my first customers was the person who you mentioned, Dr. Laura Berman. And Dr. Laura Berman, she had her own show on Oprah. She had her own radio show, nationally syndicated. And so she came with, a fair amount of celebrity status and credibility. And it was a great way for me to get my first client. And so she wasn't my very, very first client, but one of my first clients. And the way that I found her was through my old boss, a guy that I used to work with about a decade before that at a small solar company in Orange County. And so the key point, though, that I really want to remind every listener who's listening right now is you never know who might know someone. And so I like the idea of always building relationships that last. And this particular relationship is a guy that I talked to off and on throughout the years. I didn't lose contact with him. And the fact that I didn't lose contact with him made me top of mind. And so I'll share a little exercise that I learned from Jordan Harbinger. And Jordan Harbinger is a podcaster, is a huge show. I got a chance to interview him, and he talks about this idea of going back and looking at your text messages and going back to the oldest text message that you have and start engaging with those people. It may be a weak or dormant tie, somebody that you haven't talked to a lot. And ultimately, those people, they're not expecting to hear from you. So if they hear from you, they might be a little bit skeptical at first. So you just got to remind them that you're just calling to reach out. You're just calling to catch up or see how they're doing, or they popped in your mind, because you don't want people to think like you're after something, and you shouldn't. You don't want to dig a well when you're thirsty, right? You want to dig the well before you're thirsty, so you have that water. And Jordan shared that quote, and I think this is a really key thing to remember about the power of relationships. You never know which person from your past could open a door of opportunities. So in this case, I got a call from my old boss. And he says, "Hey, I know you started a podcast company. And by the way, you need to let people know whatever it is you're doing, whether that be through social or through talking. You let him know. And I have this friend who wants to start a podcast. I would love to connect you to her." And then one thing led to another, and that's how it started.
Okay, here we are again. The power of the network seems to be a common theme that shows up on the show. All right. Do you remember the very, very first customer that you onboarded onto Podify. So you got that specific one, the bigger name customer, through your old boss. Is that similarly how you got the other ones? Just talking to different people, working the network?
Yeah, it's so funny because as I look back and think about, okay, where did this person come from, and where did this person come? So there's really three places where they came from. Number one is referrals. And that means somebody that I know, somebody that I built a relationship with, referred somebody. Number two, through LinkedIn. And when I say LinkedIn, I didn't do cold outreach. I was posting on LinkedIn. And because I was posting on LinkedIn, people knew what I was doing and people started asking me questions. So tell me about what you're doing. Okay. That's the second place. And then the third place it came from is what I'll just call simply conversations. So people reaching out to me because they were referred, people finding me or knowing about me because they saw me on LinkedIn, or people who I've reached out to, I've started a conversation. So to answer your question about my very, very first customer, well, there's probably two that happened simultaneously. One was a referral from a person who I used to work with at Tesla. But here's the interesting thing. He was also somebody that got to know me through the power of LinkedIn. He saw my posts. So I got introduced through a connection on LinkedIn, through a DM on LinkedIn. And then he saw me making posts. So then he proactively, we scheduled a meeting and got to know each other. But then he scheduled a second meeting because he wanted help with his podcast. And then the other person that was early on, it came because I believe in what I call backyard barbecue conversations. And what do I mean by that? Well, when you have a conversation with somebody on the DM in LinkedIn or any social media platform for that matter, what you don't want is a monologue and a long paragraph, 2-paragraph thing with somebody telling you everything they did. That would never happen in a backyard barbecue where you meet somebody. Right. Hi, my name's Billy, and blah, 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 this is what I do. Do you want to sign up? That would never happen. And so I just like to have casual conversation where it's get to know you conversation. I always like to look at the profile and say what areas of common ground exist that doesn't feel forced. Example of something that feels forced. Hey, I see we have connections in common. Well, I have 35,000 connections. So yeah, there's probably going to be a few we have in common. So that's not really what I would start with. What I would start with is there something unusual about their background? Like in my headline, I put ramen addict. So if I was reaching out to me, I would say, I noticed you're a ramen addict. I am too. What's your favorite spot? That's a backyard conversation. Okay. Yeah. Or another thing that I like to do is I like recommending things or asking questions about their show. So like, hey, I see you have a show about, somebody has a show about people who didn't make it into the Hall of Fame of baseball that maybe should have. And I said, your show premise is really interesting. Would love to know, who do you think out of everyone that you've talked about, who do you think is most deserving of being in the Hall of Fame that never made it? So that's a backyard conversation.
Yeah. Just taking it to the personal interests. Okay. So working the network, getting referrals. It sounds a lot like the Benjamin Franklin, the squeaky wheel method, where he would make sure that he didn't grease his wheels so that everybody would know he was working whenever he was pushing his cart back and forth.
Yeah.
Where, whatever. And that's kind of like social media today. You just want to let people know, as you're going about your business, at least put it out there. Let the wheel squeak a little bit. So have you transitioned at all to doing like traditional advertising or, digital marketing and other ways of actually like paying to promote your services, or moved into that at all?
I haven't. And honestly, I don't know if I will with the current structure of my company the way it is, because it's not like we can take on unlimited clients. And what I mean by that is we have the luxury of being selective with who we choose to invite to be a client of ours and who we choose not to. There's sometimes where I meet with people and it's clear that it's not a fit. It's not a fit because they're not someone who I think we would mesh well with as a company. Either we can't provide what they're looking for, or maybe it's something else that makes me have some reservation. And 1% doubt and you're out. I kind of subscribe to the philosophy of life's short, work with people who you want to work with. And so for me,
Yeah.
I don't see a need to do some sort of mass marketing strategy that's going to push out the company to the masses yet. Now, if we had technology, or if we were trying to promote some SaaS product or digital service that,
Yeah.
or a course or something like that, yes, we could do it for that. And we will do that for some of our clients. But as far as for our core service offering, we won't do that. And especially because I firmly believe that the best way to attract the right people is to show up in places where your ideal customer avatar hangs out.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Talk a little bit about that. Like, what is your target customer, your ideal target customer? Because you could say, well, podcasters,
Yeah.
but there's probably a smaller niche within that you've defined. So it'd be good to hear
Yeah,
you talk about that.
totally. There's really two core client avatars. The first one is, we'll call them the solopreneur, entrepreneur, or personal brand that is a speaker, is a consultant, is a coach, or maybe they have a small service business, someone that wants other people to know what they do, that wants some credibility for what they do, and wants to build a loyal following. That's one core bucket. And maybe they use it as a networking tool or as a marketing vehicle, something of that nature. And then the other one is what I'll call a celebrity or influencer who has a known and pre-existing audience. So Dr. Laura Berman would be an example, or Danny Lowe Priori, who's got Off the Cuff. He was a Vine influencer. People like that who have a following, maybe some comedians, for example.
Yeah.
Because if they have a following, chances are people are going to want to be a part of whatever they're doing in a podcast or other kinds of media. And so we're a podcast production company, but we do more than podcast production. We do video production, we do social media, and we do all sorts of written content and web development, things of that nature. And so we always look for people who will attract an audience because of who they are. So those would be the two core.
Okay. And it sounds like it's more of a white glove service. Like you're saying, you're not doing mass scale advertising because it's not just some automated service. It's more of a high touch,
correct,
manual effort. Okay.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah. And then look, we use some things that are like tools that help us with with what we do, because we're certainly not ignoring the groundswell of momentum that is happening because of AI and all the things that are allowing people to work more effectively and efficiently. And so we employ all those that we can, because they're helpful. But as a business, we recognize that people want human interaction. They want that one-on-one attention. And even though there is going to be a subsection of the market that wants all AI and nothing else, I'd say there's also a very big section of the population that wants to know they have a person who may be using AI tools, but a person who's really making sure that everything runs smoothly. Right. And that's what we provide.
As of right now, there's not the marketing robot or the podcasting robot that just is the all powerful that you can just say, produce my podcast, please.
Not yet. It's coming though.
Right. It seems like it's a matter of time at this point, the way everything's moving so fast.
It really does.
I was just talking to somebody yesterday about that. It's like they were asking me how I saw marketing in the next 5 years. I was like, 5 years? I have no idea about 5 years from now. There's no way to know what's going to happen by then. It's like maybe 1 year we can make some predictions, but things are changing so fast.
It's crazy how fast things are happening. And if you're not, look at the way I see it is, if you're not using the tools, you're going to get beat by somebody who is using the tools. That's the thing. So
for sure. Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good point, that there's always going to be a gap between, the businesses who just want to focus on their core business versus the people who are using all the latest tools and staying up to date on those latest tools. Until, of course, if there does become some all-powerful AI that can just be a human for you. But okay, 100%. So we can still all make money until that happens. Get back on track now. All right, so no advertising the traditional way or digital marketing, but it sounds like you're using content marketing, so to speak, like putting out a good bit of content on social media. Which platforms do you prefer?
For me, I think the go-to, well, one, I know it has been, and I think it will continue to be LinkedIn, because there's enough people on LinkedIn who fit one or both of those client avatars that I just mentioned, more of the former than the latter, but both exist on the platform. Especially there are some influencers who we've produced podcasts for. But I would say LinkedIn is very interesting because there are very, very few, relative to the number of people who are viewing content, very few content creators. Now, more and more are coming into the mix, more than when I started 3 years ago.
For sure.
But still, the ratio is relatively small. When you look at something like Instagram, for example, almost everyone who uses Instagram also posts photos. Not everyone, but a lot do. And so with LinkedIn, it's a little bit different. There's a lot of lurkers. There's a lot of people that just go there to consume content. They're not necessarily going to create content. The other thing about LinkedIn that's really fascinating is there really is absolutely zero that can get in your way of being successful, except for your own work ethic. And what I mean by that is if you dedicate the time, you can see success. If you dedicate the time to one, making it a priority to pour into other people and get to know other people and be there for other people. If you come into LinkedIn with a selfish, or what I call a getters mindset, you're going to get nothing. You're going to basically waste your time. But if you come in with a heart full of giving, and you give relentlessly through engaging in other people's content, celebrating other people, making it a priority to set time to meet other people, and you build a tribe and you get to know other people on the platform, it's very reciprocal, right? It's very like you shouldn't do it with the idea of like, hey, I'm doing this so I get it back. But the reality is you do get it back. It may not be directly, hey, I'm going to engage in Paris's post, therefore Paris will engage in my post. Sometimes it happens that way, but it doesn't always happen in that way.
So I think that that message needs to go far and wide to all the salespeople selling call services, lead gen service, all the things that I think blow up everybody's DMs on LinkedIn constantly. It's like, I have no idea who you are. I'm not going to do business with you from these random, like you were saying, just here's all my services, notice me and connect with me. It's like, it's so worn out.
Well, trust but verify. I mean, you might trust that the message is you assume positive intent and you assume that what they're saying is real, but look at their content, look at their digital presence. Do they have the elements out there to back up what they're saying with something that you could see and also get to know them? I mean, that's why video is so powerful. Somebody watches a video of you talking, of me talking, even this podcast. I mean, somebody could watch this and get to know me. They could watch this and get to know you. And it builds that trust. We trust people who we get to know. And the better we know people, the more likely we trust them more. And the more we trust somebody, the more willing we are to give them a shot.
Yeah. And I think that LinkedIn could do something to help sort through just the loads of spam that come through so that you can kind of tell some kind of quality
You would
ranking.
think so, right? I mean, they are Microsoft, owned by Microsoft. You think they could figure that out?
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of metrics where it's like if you have certain connections, or I don't know, there's got to be an algorithm you could write to where you could see, hey, this is most likely somebody that you'd want to talk to based on your past conversations or something. Okay. So content marketing on LinkedIn. Do you still post just for the sake of awareness on other platforms, like just to get it out there, or are you just hyper focused on LinkedIn?
Yeah, well, I would say super candidly, it's gone in waves. I'd say there's been times where I post more on Instagram. There's been times where I posted on YouTube. I don't post on Twitter that much, although I have. And yeah, so I'd say for me, LinkedIn's always been the constant. The other platform that I went knee deep in, and maybe more waist deep, or maybe even more up to the neck deep, is Clubhouse. But Clubhouse isn't really anything like it used to be. So I spent an obscene amount of hours on Clubhouse, probably like 8-10 hours a day in some cases. And it was an amazing experience. I got to meet some incredible people. But what a lot of people don't tell you is the less glamorous parts of social media. And so, yeah, while there are some examples of people who are brilliant and can come up with great content, and it blows up, and they're just they have a knack for creating content, there are a lot more people out there who have grinded, who have put in the work, who have tested, who have put in the time. If you look at like quote unquote LinkedIn influencers, the stark reality is they've just put in more time than everybody else. Now, they've gotten better at creating content, and that didn't happen by accident, it happened by doing. And so I think if somebody's looking for a free pass, I'd say better off picking a platform to focus on and go really hard at that platform. So to get to the spirit of your question, which is, am I spending time on other platforms? For all intents and purposes, no, because most of my traction has been on LinkedIn, and most of my time has been on LinkedIn. And I don't know how to quantify how much time I put on early on, or I don't know how accurate I'd be, but it wouldn't be inaccurate to say I spent at least 25 to 30 hours a week on platform in the early stages.
Wow.
That might be underestimating it. And so what does that look like? I'll just give a few quick tips because it might be helpful for somebody. The first thing is find people like you. I always say, find your you. Find somebody out there who's doing something like you do. Maybe it's your industry. Maybe they're a podcaster. Maybe they're a business owner. Maybe whatever it is, they're a coach, but they're really doing well on LinkedIn. They're crushing it on LinkedIn. Follow them, connect with them, and most importantly, engage in their content. Not just to engage in their content, but engage into the comments in their comments. So other people's comments, you comment on other people's comments, not just the post. Guess what? Now you get to know them, and you also get to know their audience. And as you get to know their audience, some of those people also post. So you connect with them, you follow them, and you comment on their posts. And all of a sudden you have this tribe of friends that you're creating because you're building relationships in the comments. So you build those relationships in the comments over time, and you don't need to force it. It doesn't need to happen overnight. So maybe in the first week, you're connecting with people, you're sending a few backyard conversation type messages, you're commenting, and then make a list of everyone that you want to engage with, making a hot list, an engagement list. And what that does is it gives you the ability to regularly check in and chat and be top of mind with those people. Because people who are commenting on other people's posts likely will comment on your post. And so when you post, they're going to be notified, they might comment. And the more people engage, it's kind of like a pinball machine. And I took this from Andy Foote. He basically says LinkedIn comments are like a pinball machine, because when you put the ball out there, every time it hits something is like a comment or a like. And to keep the pinball in the game, you need more of those comments and likes. And the flippers are like more comments, right? And so you want to keep the ball in the game as long as possible. And so you want to get that early traction with your posts. And the more your posts get visible, the more people start following you, connecting with you, and then it just builds from there. But it all starts with you finding those people who are in your niche or in your domain expertise that you get to know and that you build relationships with, and it'll expand from there.
Yeah, I think that comments are definitely underrated, because I've seen even on other platforms like Facebook, and there was like a viral, I think, TikTok going around recently about about using your Facebook ads and realizing that every ad has a comment section, and that's like a whole other aspect of the ad, not just the direct impressions and clicks or whatever, but every question in there is the potential to, like you're saying, it's like to bounce the ping pong ball back up through the system through notifications, because every time somebody comments and you respond, they get a notification. And back in the day, they were way more generous with notifications. And like if you commented on one person's thing, it's kind of more like LinkedIn is now. They'll notify like everybody who ever commented on that post and say, so-and-so also commented on that post that you commented on, even if they're not responding to your comment specifically. So it really is like a compounding or exponential awareness builder by just engaging in the comments. It's such a simple hack that is powerful.
Well, a lot of this stuff, it goes back to what I said a minute ago, which is it's you got to put in the work. Yes, there's strategy, and yes, there's hacks or secrets or things like that. But ultimately, a lot of it is really basic stuff done over and over and over again. And Instagram's the same way. I mean, find people who you want to, they're in your space. You engage in their, you follow, you engage, and you follow other people, and it's like kindling for a fire. In order for a fire to start, you need to have that kindling, and that kindling is those early relationships that people will, see your content and like your content, and it builds from there.
That's good. All right. So we've got work in your personal network and then grow in your network through LinkedIn, social media, engaging in the comments. Is there anything else in your tool chest?
Yeah. I mean, I would say podcasting itself is really important. And the reason why, you can build immense loyalty through the power of audio communication. And the reason why is that when you speak to somebody in their ear, it's probably the most intimate form of communication. And so there's three things that you're getting. You're getting intimacy, you're getting frequency, and you're getting duration. What is frequency? Frequency means on a regular basis, you get this connection with this person. Duration is that the length of time that you get that communication is greater than any other medium out there where it's a one-way communication, right? So you're talking to somebody for 50 minutes, an hour, 60, 30 minutes, whatever that may be. It's a long duration of time. So you really get to know people because of that. And you hear them over and over again through that frequency, you really get to know them. And then the intimacy hammers it home and makes it so much more just at the heart level, right? Like somebody listening right now really hears the inflection. They hear the character of another human being's voice. And we relate to that because we're all human beings. And so I love the power of the medium. So I would say for anybody who wants to build loyalty, that it's a great, great medium to choose. But you got to be willing to, guess what, put in the work. So, or pay somebody to put in the work. In my case, you could hire me, or you could hire a company like mine. And so I'll give you a couple really quick hits about how to think about starting a podcast. So the first one is I'm going to do a book recommendation. The book is called Make Noise. And I often recommend this book. Great, great book. It really covers the full spectrum of what it takes to be successful in the podcast space. It's a little bit older, so some of it's just a little bit dated, but honestly, the principles apply. It talks about interviewing. It talks about show concept, talks about show structure. I mean, it's a fantastic book. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would think about with the podcast is get really, really clear on why you're doing it. And if your idea of doing it, it really is ego driven, then check that at the door and figure out what is the other reason you're doing it. Because that will exist regardless. Your ego is your ego. But what's the other reason you're doing it? Are you doing it as a business development tool? Are you doing it to gain clients? Are you doing it to raise awareness for a cause? Everybody's going to be different, right? So figure out what that is. And then the third piece is clearly identify who it is will listen to your show and why they will listen to your show. And what I mean by that is you can have like an idea of like a broad sense of like who might be interested, but why does it matter? Why would they care? And so I always strive when I'm thinking of show concepts to think about what can I do to differentiate my show from any other show that's out there so that it gives the potential audience some kind of feeling that what they're getting with your show, they can't get everywhere else. And that's one of the things that Make Noise talks about. So when I'm coaching and helping podcasters, I like to use the s'mores analogy because it's graham crackers great, right? Marshmallow's great, and Hershey's bars they're great too. But you put them together and it's magical. Yeah. A s'mores is such a great treat because of the combination. And in the same way that a Hollywood producer is going to say it's Gremlins meets Titanic, right? It puts two dissimilar things together and joins them into one. Think about that for your show and think about that for your niche. And so I interviewed somebody, she was going to do a wellness podcast, but then she said, I need a niche down. She said, I'm going to do a wellness podcast, but more in like the spirituality. And then she said, well, maybe not spirituality, but I'm going to do oils, essential oils. And she's like, okay, but that's too broad. So she did a specific brand of essential oils. So she went from wellness to spirituality to essential oils to a specific brand of essential oils. And so niche down again, and then niche down till it hurts. Now that's conventional wisdom. And what I'll say is there's not podcast police out there. So you can always choose to go wider. Just know the wider you go, generally speaking, the longer it takes. The more narrow you go, the faster you're going to find your audience. And so when you identify who that listener is and why would they care, really try to give yourself the ability to narrow and sharpen the focus, because then you can always expand from there.
Awesome. That's some gold. And we're coming up on needing to wrap up here soon. So if someone is, let's say we've got 1,000 ideal Podify target audience, exact listeners, or that you're going for, exact audience. What's that pitch kind of going on what you're saying, off of what you're saying, of what it takes to get a podcast going? What's that overlap to where they should reach out to you guys and use your service?
I'd say we buy people back their time. And it's really as simple as that. So if you're a business owner, if you're a influencer, if you're somebody that wants to do a podcast but does not have the time or wants to use their time in other ways, because we all have the same amount of time, then you'd reach out to Podify or another company. And we're not the only players in the space. I'd say what makes us and what separates us that makes us different, that would make it the right fit, is the people. And you wouldn't know that until you meet us. So I'd say schedule a strategy call and see if it's the right fit. Starting with me, am I the right fit? Am I not? And then my team members, we have an extremely dedicated and talented team of artists who help make whatever it is you want to make a reality. And having been at Tesla, I take a lot of pride and care into the recruiting of team members. And so for me, I always avoid the settle on talent thing that can happen. 1% doubt and I'm out. And so I use that phrase again because it is not worth my time, and it's definitely not worth my partner client's time to have people on the team that are slowing us down or making it challenging. And so we always strive to hire the best people. It's so important for me to have those high levels of standards. And then the last thing I'll share is it really comes down to your needs. Every provider out there can accommodate you in different ways. And so where our sweet spot is do you host a show that you want to have the show edited, a video podcast, show up on YouTube, maybe some help with some social media, might need help with web development. We can do all those things, and monetization and creating courses, doing all of those types of things, or creative producers. So we have a pretty wide spectrum of services that we offer. And then there's some companies that just specialize in editing, or you could go hire a freelancer and do just one thing. And so if you're looking for more a custom and white glove service, then we're probably the right fit. If you're looking for just one or two things done, then you might want to go with a company or an individual who could just do those one or two things.
Is there a threshold where you'd recommend, like, your target audience being a certain downloads tier, or certain amount of popularity that usually fits?
Yeah.
Or is that not a metric?
Good question. I'd say it's only a metric in that if it matters to you, you should think about it and figure out what why it is important. But for us, downloads might not be important for some of our shows because they're doing it as a networking or business development. And downloads matter to a certain degree, but if it's a niche show, like I was just talking to a guy right now, he's a podcast consultant and he's working with a show that has a total potential audience of 3,000 people. But one of those 3,000 could be a 7-figure deal for that podcaster. So downloads don't matter for a show like that. What matters is he getting the right people to listen to the show? And so every show is going to be a little bit different. So what we do, and this is our kind of our sales process, is we don't know until we've met you if it's going to be a fit, and then also what package would make the most sense. And so I always meet with our prospective clients first, myself, and then the team. And the reason why is that we want to get to know you and understand what's important. And even if you're not a client, we're going to give you strategy and say, hey, maybe you could think about this, or maybe you think about that. And here's what we've seen successful for other shows, because we're always going to pour into you no matter what, because not everyone's going to be a good fit.
So we've gone over a great set of advice for any business trying to get their first customers, starting off with building your network and leaning on that network when it comes time to get customers for your business, and then defining your target audience super clearly, and then I think, what was it, working the network, and then using social media, engaging with that target audience. That's what it was. And then you switched over to, okay, specifically for building a podcast, similar to a business defining their target audience, niche down the topic of your podcast as far as possible, niche down till it hurts, and then put in the work of producing that podcast or hiring a service like yours to get it produced and putting it out there. What about, so there's somebody listening here probably thinking about starting a podcast. Can you set their expectations a little bit for that, let's say, first month to 3 months of what they should expect? Because I'm sure that a lot of people listening to some famous podcasters are thinking, I could do that. They're just talking to their friends or whatever. And jump in, and then maybe first week they're not famous yet, and they're like, wait a minute. Why am I not on the top of the charts?
Well, it is interesting because I think most people instinctually know they're not going to be the next Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
But despite them knowing that, they do have often unrealistic expectations, especially when it comes to what I'll call the vanity metrics, right? Everybody wants downloads. And so can you get the downloads? Yes. But I want you to think about your podcast like you would a book. A book will not find readers unless you put in the work to help them find your book. And it's the same thing with the podcast. It's like throwing something in the ocean, expecting someone to find it. They're not going to find it. You got to leave the breadcrumbs for people to find whatever it is you want them to find. And in this case, the podcast is no different. And so I think the advice I'd give is like, how do you think about show growth? Because that's what people want. And so I'll give 3 ideas for show growth. And in answer to your question, the expectation is, don't think of it like a short-term gratification opportunity. Think of it like a long-term 10-year opportunity. And if you're thinking about it short-term, that's okay. Just realize that you're doing a seasonal show for fun. It's a passion project. If you want to see long-term results, you got to put in the long-term effort. And so doing something over the long haul is really key to 90% of shows' success, is that they've done it for a long enough period to where they found their audience. So now to my 3 points on how you find your audience. There's really 3 levers you can pull. First one's organic. Second one is collaboration. And the third one is paid. And I think you and I spoke about this in a previous conversation. And when you think about organic, think about ways that you can step in front of success. There's a lot of momentum generating vehicles out there, like YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, TikTok for social media, like SEO, and which include transcription, blogs, show notes, anything that's written. 74% of podcasts are found because people search. It's getting into the news cycle, right? And that's from Podcast Movement, getting into the news cycle, right now we have a bunch of shows that are talking about things that are on Netflix, talking about things that are in the news, talking about things that are trending. And why? Because we want to get into the news cycle. So we could create a short that might go viral. So we can create other content. And the podcast is really a vehicle to create other content, because podcasting by its nature is not a distribution vehicle. It's a loyalty vehicle. But how do you get that distribution? Well, go to distribution vehicles. So YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Yeah. The second lever point is you collaborate with other people in your medium. So if you're a YouTuber, go on YouTube. If you're a podcast, go on podcasts. So that's the second one. And do it at scale. Do it as frequently as you can. And then the third thing is you pay for people to find you. You could pay through podcast platforms or players like Castbox, Overcast. You could use tools and platforms like Mopod or Headliner. A number of tools out there that help you get downloads and listeners. Or you can pay in other ways. The most effective way I found is podcast promos. So if you if I were to do a promo for your show on my show, for example, that will work really, really well. And so those are just some ideas of how to grow an audience. Again, knowing that it's not going to be easy. It's going to take some time and attention over the long term. Those would be some of the, I'd say, most common and most effective ways to grow a podcast audience.
Billy, this has been awesome. You've packed a ton of value into this for anybody starting a business and especially starting a podcast. So thank you for being here today. Listeners, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, or if you know somebody who has a podcast or is thinking about it, share this episode with them. A ton of value here that applies directly to what they're trying to do. Thanks again for being here, Billy.
It's been a joy, Paris. It's been a real fun conversation, and always love hanging.
All right, everybody. See you next episode.